Okay, imagine this. I've got two choices in life. I could become an expat, I could go overseas and do my job, or I could stay in my country of origin and just have a job and do my own thing. In those two scenarios, can you explain the key points that are different for retirement planning?
Okay, so between expat planning and financial planning for someone who hasn't left their country, well, the main differences, I mean, there's several, but one is the fact that the expat, in my opinion, has to take more ownership, much more ownership and responsibility for their financial planning, because they're working in one country. For example, they can be in South Africa, then they can move to Brazil, then move to the US. So the ideal situation is to have a centralized retirement savings plan in a tax neutral location, so they can contribute into that from any location where they're working, and that can be a secure fund which they build up for whatever, whether it's retirement or their own concept of financial independence.
So with your experience, what tends to happen? Why does it go wrong?
Because people work for a certain amount of time, they don't really realize how long they'll be spending in, whether it's Singapore or South Africa, as I said. So they just save locally. Sometimes it's a local company pension scheme, and then they can go back to their base country and then have another expat assignment. So it becomes very, very messy, and they don't actually think of accumulating savings in one place. So they end up with many pots around the world. Nothing's really working for them, and they have several logins. They never get around to reviewing them. So it becomes a little bit messy, and people forget about them as well. They forget about little pots here and there from the past.
So what are the big risks in that scenario?
Risk is the individual will not have enough money to retire on in the future. They'll forget about certain amounts of savings they have in different jurisdictions. The risk is not doing enough for their own financial planning. So
people might forget about it all and lose it all?
Yeah, they can forget about it, or the investment performance can be very, very weak. They're not necessarily receiving any communication or even logging in. They never get around to it. Mm-hmm. With expats, the key thing is their expectations can become very, very high in terms of their lifestyle, because expats tend to have the luxuries, like their apartment covered by their company. Sometimes many occasions their children's private school fees are covered. So a lot of these things are natural benefits which they become accustomed to, and then when it comes to retirement they realize, oh my god, they've got big costs to pay, especially rent, and they've got that expat lifestyle. People who live in Singapore, then Rio and Dubai, they've got a certain standard of living, so it can be a come down if they go back to their base country or have to fund that lifestyle from their own retirement fund.
So why should expats bother with retirement planning? Isn't it just a waste of money?
Why would you say a waste of money when you're building a future for yourself?
Well, you're busy doing your job, you've got a nice lifestyle. The last thing in your mind is retirement.
Well, it's the last thing on anyone's mind until it kind of, you can see it in the horizon and you start to panic. So yeah, we've got to take ownership of it, because I don't think we can rely on governments anymore. Most countries in the world won't really cover you, especially if you've got that lifestyle expectation. I don't think national insurance contributions and a state pension will cover anyone, especially if they've been living the high life somewhere else in the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how important is it to start retirement planning in your 30s?
I'd say it's very important to start in your 20s, but I don't know many people who've done that. But I'd say it's important to start as soon as possible, because if you look at differences, I don't want to bore you with the figures now. We can. I've got plenty of examples, but if you look at the difference between someone starting in their 20s, 30s, 40s, what they have to start doing in their 40s is save maybe double the amount or triple than they would have had to do in their 20s. If you look at graphs showing investment performance over 15, 20, 25 years, you can see the steeper part of that exponential curve, and that shows really why you have to start earlier, because it'll save you that pressure later on in life.
Well, that's because of compound growth, I guess.
Yes, because of compound growth, and people always say, well, I've got this to pay for in my 20s, I've got this, I'm having children in my 30s, I'm buying a house in my 40s. There'll always be something, so you have to set aside a certain amount, and it's all about discipline and starting early.
A good friend of mine is working abroad and has a couple of kids who are toddlers. Should he be worried about how he's going to pay for those university fees?
Should he be worried? Well, if he starts sooner, he wouldn't have much to worry about later on in life, but it's something which he should take seriously, let's say, because if we're looking at university education, the cost of the fee cost and the living costs, they're going up. They're going up at a higher rate compared to general inflation. And if you're looking at the US, it could be anything between $40,000 and $60,000. That's for the fees and the costs.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and in the UK it could be between 20, 35 typically.
Is that dollars or pounds?
Pounds.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you multiply that by 3, 4, 5 years, depending on the length of the course, and then by however many children you have, imagine if you've got 2 or 3 kids. That turns into a very, very big amount. And if you look at the average life plan of a person, right? Those kids will be going to university when they're in their 50s, when the parents are in their 50s, right?
Yeah.
So that huge cost can come into play when the parents are thinking about its early retirement. So planning is very important.
So you could be looking at £200,000 plus.
Yeah, easily.
Wow, that is a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. People don't take this into account and they start funding it from cash flow, and that's not ideal.
So personally, I'm putting off investing in anything at the moment. It's so scary out there. There's Brexit, Chinese markets fell earlier this year, and no one knows what is going to happen in the US elections later this year. When is it a good time to invest?
Well, there are 2 simple answers to that. One is never, because there'll always be something in the news every day. Every time you put the TV on, there's something happening. Bad news sells, and that's the way it is. But if you're making a plan for your retirement or educating your children, that's a decision which could be anything between 15 and 30 years ahead. So there are always going to be events, disasters, political events all the time. And there have been in the past. You can look at things like, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the oil crisis in the 70s, the Falklands War. The list is endless. So at the same time, if you compare investment performance, particularly in the equity market over the last 100 years, you can see that over 10-year periods, the performance has been solid and supportive of what I'm saying in terms of having a long-term approach.
Okay.